So imagine your brain is like a GPS system.
Okay.
You're driving in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly you just completely lose your satellite signal. But instead of flashing a warning or, admitting it's lost and telling you to pull over, your GPS quietly draws a totally fake, non-existent road on the screen.
Wow. Right, just to keep you driving.
Exactly, just so you don't panic. And, well, welcome to the architecture of human conviction. In this deep dive, custom tailored for you, the learner, we are pulling excerpts from a really fascinating text called The Architecture of Human Conviction.
It's a great one.
Yeah, it really is. We're analyzing this central behavioral mystery. Basically, why do people hold on to beliefs so incredibly tightly, even when completely conflicting, undeniable evidence is staring them right in the face?
Right. And to dismantle that architecture, we really have to start with the foundational premise of the text. It totally challenges how we traditionally define conviction.
Yeah.
From a psychological and neurological perspective, a belief is not just a collection of facts. Fundamentally, a belief is a construct of meaning.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because we traditionally view beliefs as architectural structures built out of informational bricks, right?
Exactly, yeah.
If you find a bad brick, like a false fact, you just pull it out and replace it with a structurally sound brick. But if belief is actually about meaning, that completely changes the mechanism of how we process reality.
It does, completely.
We aren't fact-checking machines at all. We are narrative-generating machines. And by the end of this deep dive, you, the listener, are going to have a totally new lens for understanding not just other people's stubborn arguments, but your own core convictions.
Because the brain's primary cognitive function, well, beyond regulating your autonomic nervous system, is to act as a relentless storyteller.
Right.
It is constantly scanning the environment, searching for patterns, causal links, any explanation, really, that makes this chaotic world feel somewhat navigable.
So it's looking for a story.
Yes. And when it encounters incomplete information, it does not just leave a blank space, it synthesizes whatever available data it has and forcefully fills in the gaps to create a cohesive narrative.
It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces, right? Instead of leaving the holes empty, we just, jam in pieces from a totally different puzzle so we don't have to look at the gaps.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
So what does this all mean? Are we just hardwired to avoid the phrase, I don't know at all costs?
What's fascinating here is that, yes, belief systems are literally born out of this gap-filling survival mechanism. It's a defense against the chaos of not knowing. You really have to look at the asymmetric cost of errors in evolutionary biology.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Imagine early hominids on the savannah. They hear a sudden rustling in the tall grass. There are two potential errors they can make here.
Right.
A type error is a false positive. They believe the rustling is a lion, they panic, they run away, but it's just the wind.
So they just look a little silly.
Exactly. The cost of that error is just a few wasted calories. But a type 2 error is a false negative. They believe it's just the wind, they relax, but it is actually a lion.
And the cost of that is death.
Precisely. Death. So the brain evolved to be this paranoid pattern recognition machine because forming an immediate, actionable belief, even if it's mathematically inaccurate, is vastly superior for survival than lingering in a state of vulnerable uncertainty.
Wow. So the biological discomfort of uncertainty is the engine. It triggers the amygdala, spikes our cortisol, and makes us feel physically out of control.
Exactly.
And then the belief, regardless of its factual accuracy, acts as the neurological remedy. It lowers the cortisol.
Right, it's a remedy. But that biological remedy is just the ground floor of the architecture.
Okay.
The structure only hardens into an unbreakable conviction when that gap-filling story sinks its hooks into a person's core identity.
Oh, wow.
People do not just hold beliefs, they fuse with them. So when a belief becomes tied to how you define yourself, your brain processes a challenge to that belief not as new data, but as an actual physical threat.
Which totally explains the historical resistance to scientific breakthroughs. Like, think about Ignaz Semmelweis in the 1840s.
That's a classic example.
Right. For you listening who might not know, he was a physician in Vienna who noticed that women in maternity wards, staffed by doctors, were dying of postpartum infections at drastically higher rates than wards staffed by midwives.
A huge disparity.
Yeah, and he looked at the data and realized the doctors were performing autopsies and then immediately delivering babies without washing their hands. So he proposed this inventive invisible mechanism of cadaverous particles, which was like an early precursor to germ theory.
And Semmelweis brought them undeniable statistical proof. He instituted a strict hand-washing protocol using chlorinated lime solutions, and mortality rates plummeted instantly.
Like overnight.
Yes, the data was bulletproof. Yet the medical establishment violently rejected his findings. They mocked him, they pushed him out of the profession entirely, and he tragically died in an asylum.
All because the data threatened their identity.
Exactly.
The doctors in 19th century Vienna viewed themselves as gentlemen, and the cultural definition of a gentleman was someone whose hands were inherently clean.
Right. Gentlemen are clean by definition.
So Semmelweis wasn't just giving them a new medical protocol. He was essentially telling them that they were the ones killing the patients. The spreadsheet of facts required them to accept this completely identity-destroying narrative.
So their brains simply rejected the facts to protect the self. The prefrontal cortex, which handles logical reasoning, effectively goes offline when the amygdala detects an identity threat like that.
It just shuts down.
It does. The brain experiences cognitive dissonance, that severe psychological stress of holding contradictory ideas. To resolve that stress, the brain doesn't update the belief. It attacks the source of the dissonant information.
It's a self-defense mechanism.
Exactly. And this fusion of identity and belief is then cemented by emotion. Emotion acts as the glue.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text notes that emotion acts as the primary adhesive for conviction, specifically highlighting highly arousing emotions like fear, anger, and curiosity.
Yes.
But wait a second, there seems to be a glaring paradox here. Let's push back on this.
Okay.
If the biological purpose of forming a belief is to cure the discomfort of uncertainty and lower our cortisol, why do people latch on to terrifying beliefs?
That is the big question.
I mean, if someone stumbles into a dark, rolled-ended conspiracy theory, wouldn't their brain want to drop it immediately to feel safe? Why hold on to a narrative that causes chronic stress?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really comes down to the neurochemical reward system of possessing hidden knowledge.
Oh.
See, fear and anger are highly arousing, but they are incredibly engaging. When an individual adopts a terrifying conspiracy theory, they're not just absorbing a scary story. They are adopting a new, elevated identity. They become the hero, the enlightened one who sees the hidden strings controlling the world, while everyone else is just asleep.
Oh, wow. It's the dopamine hit of the eureka moment.
Yes, exactly. That dopamine reward vastly outweighs the cortisol stress of the terrifying content. A dark, insidious explanation for a random, chaotic event still fulfills the brain's ultimate desire.
Which is what?
It tells you who the bad guys are, what the rules of the game are, and how the world operates. It cures the unbearable weight of senseless chaos. Knowing a monster is orchestrating things is neurologically preferable to accepting that terrible things happen for absolutely no reason.
Because chaos means you have no agency. If there's a monster, at least you can fight it or hide from it.
Exactly. You have a role to play.
So we form these beliefs to cure uncertainty, we fuse them to our identity, and we use the neurochemical rush of emotion as a concrete to set the foundation.
Beautifully put.
But these convictions don't just survive in a vacuum inside our heads, we take them out into the social ecosystem.
We do. And we have to look at the evolutionary necessity of tribalism here. Humans are deeply social primates. Historically, isolation from the group meant certain death.
You couldn't survive alone.
No, you couldn't.
Yeah.
Therefore, we instinctively harmonize our internal reality with the external reality of the groups we feel connected to. We adopt the shared beliefs of our tribe as a mechanism of social survival, just ensuring we remain under the protection of the collective.
Which naturally leads us to the mechanics of the echo chamber. But what I love about this text is that it doesn't just treat the echo chamber as a passive room where ideas bounce around.
Right. It's not passive at all.
It details an active, aggressive neurological filter called the consistency loop. The brain actively prioritizes consistency over accuracy.
And that prioritization is handled through motivated reasoning and confirmation bias. Functional MRI studies have actually mapped what happens in the brain when an individual is confronted with information that contradicts a deeply held, socially reinforced belief.
What do the scans show?
The neural circuits involved in objective reasoning and logic show very little activity. The brain physically spends less processing time evaluating the contradictory data.
So it just skims the data looking for a loophole.
Exactly. It's looking for a way out. And when it finds that loophole, when it finds a way to dismiss the dissonant information and maintain the established belief, the ventral striatum, which is a key part of the brain's reward system, literally lights up. The
Wow.
brain literally drugs itself with pleasure for successfully ignoring reality and maintaining consistency.
That is crazy. I want to focus on the active nature of that filtering, though. It's not just that we accidentally overlook facts.
No, it's highly active.
The text uses a great framework for this. So think of your belief system as the guest list, and the brain's filtering mechanism operates like a bouncer at the door of an exclusive club.
I love this analogy.
When a new piece of information walks up to the door, the bouncer checks it against the established identity. If it confirms the belief, the velvet rope is unhooked, come on in.
Right, VIP access.
But if it contradicts the belief, the bouncer physically blocks the door. And it doesn't matter how meticulously verified that new fact is. If it's not on the guest list, it doesn't get in.
This raises an important question about how this mechanism affects specialized fields, actually. Because this isn't just a phenomenon of fringe conspiracy groups. We see this bouncer mechanism heavily at play in high-stakes environments, like financial trading.
Oh, like professional traders holding on to losing stocks despite market data screaming at them to sell.
Yes, exactly. A trader buys a stock based on a specific thesis. The stock begins to plummet due to, say, shifting market fundamentals. The objective accuracy of the situation dictates they should cut their losses.
Obviously.
But if the trader has publicly tied their professional identity to this specific thesis, the consistency loop takes over. Motivated reasoning kicks in.
So the bouncer steps up.
The bouncer steps up. They actively hunt for obscure, bullish indicators while entirely ignoring the glaring macroeconomic data causing the crash. The bouncer turns away the market reality to protect the trader's identity as a savvy investor.
Wow.
They ride the stock to zero, not because they lack data, but because accepting the data requires destroying the narrative they've built.
So it's like curating a social media feed where you exclusively follow people who tell you your terrible new haircut actually looks fantastic. Eventually, you look in the mirror and genuinely see a masterpiece.
That is exactly how the consistency loop works.
So the architecture just gets taller and more fortified, completely sealing itself off from the outside environment. The initial storytelling brain cures the uncertainty. The emotional dopamine rush glues it to the ego. The social tribe reinforces it. And the neural bouncer builds an impenetrable wall to keep out dissonant facts.
That's the full blueprint, yeah.
So what does this all mean for us? I mean, having mapped out the exact neurobiological and psychological blueprints of conviction, how do we operate in a world where we constantly collide with people whose bouncers are just turning away reality?
It necessitates a complete paradigm shift in how we approach conflict and communication. Because the standard operating procedure, when encountering someone with a deeply held conviction that contradicts verifiable evidence, is to immediately launch a factual assault. We ask, is this person right or wrong?
Right.
And when we determine they are objectively wrong, we bombard them with data to force a correction.
Which is basically the equivalent of yelling at the bouncer.
Exactly.
It just triggers their amygdala, spikes their cortisol, and causes their logical prefrontal cortex to shut down.
Yeah.
We're just pushing them deeper into their defensive architecture.
Spot on. The text argues we must abandon the right or wrong framework entirely during that initial interaction. Instead of attacking the factual inaccuracy of the belief, we must investigate the structural load that belief is bearing for the individual.
What do you mean by structural load?
We have to ask, what biological or psychological need is this belief fulfilling? Is it providing certainty in a chaotic environment? Is it granting them a sense of belonging to an otherwise inaccessible community? Is it elevating their status and giving them a sense of heroic purpose?
Oh, I see. So it moves the entire dynamic from aggressive intellectual combat to a place of structural understanding.
Yes.
You stop trying to rip the fake road off their GPS screen, and you start acknowledging the severe anxiety they're feeling about being lost in the dark.
And that transition to empathy is incredibly functional. It lowers the defensive barriers. You cannot introduce new data until the threat response is deactivated.
Yeah, it makes so much sense.
The goal outlined in the text is not to completely eradicate belief, which is biologically impossible since narrative synthesis is how we process existence, but to foster an acute awareness of the machinery.
And let's be real. For you listening, applying this framework is intensely liberating.
It really is.
The next time you find yourself locked in a frustrating debate, whether it's in a boardroom over a failing project strategy or at a family dinner over a demonstrably false news story, you don't have to get dragged into the factual mud.
No, you don't.
You can step back and observe the invisible machinery in real time. You can identify the need for certainty, the tribal harmonization, the ventral striatum lighting up when they dismiss your evidence. It changes the experience from infuriating to fascinating.
Crucially, though, that analytical lens must also be turned inward.
Yeah, that's the catch.
This is not just an instruction manual for diagnosing the cognitive blind spots of other people. The exact same invisible machinery is currently operating inside our own neurobiology. We are all utilizing motivated reasoning.
We all have bouncers.
We all have bouncers standing guard at the doors of our own identities, quietly turning away data that threatens our preferred narratives. True intellectual rigor requires auditing your own guest list.
And that is the hardest audit you can do. By the end of this deep dive, my hope is that you, the learner, walk away with a completely new set of blueprints for looking at human interaction. You can see the scaffolding behind the arguments now. But I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to explore on your own. It pushes past the mechanics of how beliefs form and looks at the extreme end of dismantling them.
Okay.
We've established that changing a core belief feels neurologically identical to losing a piece of your identity. So imagine a person who successfully and completely deconstructs their own architecture.
Oh,
If you actually manage to fire the bouncer, override the dopamine hits, and tear down every single one of your core convictions in the relentless pursuit of pure, objective accuracy, what happens to the self?
that's a profound question.
Do you achieve ultimate enlightened clarity, or do you completely dissolve the narrative structure that allows you to exist as a human being? Something to think about.